And Danny, everyone seems to be talking in the context of the higher taxes that we are seeing now as if this was an inevitability of the pandemic. Is that your view?
No, I don't think it should be inevitable that we raise taxes to pay for the pandemic. I mean, what we saw yesterday was a very high-spend, high-tax budget. Now, I think a lot of people will be saying, you know, we've just come out of the COVID pandemic. A lot of households' budgets are hit quite hard at the moment. A lot of people want to have these sort of like low tax policies that would help them keep more money in their back pockets. And perhaps, you know, the way of getting around that in terms of the fiscal responsibility that Rishi was talking about is going on a sort of more responsible spending angle and then cutting taxes to encourage growth. I mean, you know, we've seen spending increase after the pandemic. But how long is that going to last for? We're seeing national insurance rise coming into place. We're seeing income tax being frozen. Wages are going up, so that's going to drag a lot more people into the tax bands. So I think, you know, a low, stable tax environment is what people are really calling out for at the moment. So
you're saying that these higher taxes could actually discourage growth, could be counterproductive in some areas and make our economy smaller?
Well, yeah, of course, because, you know, a lot of people are talking about the cost of living crisis at the moment. Rishi mentioned it in the budget yesterday. But, of course, you know, the real impact on the cost of living is the taxes that we're facing at the moment. Council tax is going up, national insurance, as I mentioned, income tax, as I mentioned as well. So that's really going to squeeze people's incomes, and it's going to mean that they have less spending power to really, you know, boost the economy as we come out of the COVID recession.
And off the back of the budget yesterday, your organisation, the Taxpayers Alliance, produced a really useful graph where we can see the tax burden over the last 70 years, I believe. Here it is on our screens now. And we can see how high it was at the end of the Second World War. And right now, we have now reached that point again. The tax burden in the United Kingdom back up to a level not seen since 1950, since Clement Attlee. This is extraordinary under a Conservative government.
Yeah, and if you look at the graph, you can see it's only been going up. There hasn't really been any substantial cuts to the tax burden in the last 10 years or so. So this is a sort of, you know, this is an increasing trend, and it just seems like we're only ever going up. And, you know, what sort of limit are we going to reach? And we had Jacob Rees-Mogg at conference talking to our tent. And he was saying that he thinks that we're now reaching a point where the tax level is going to become too high. So, you know, this is sort of like the limit. We're reaching the limits here of what, you know, the tax take could be. So I think, you know, Rishi really needs to start thinking. He said in the budget that he wants to cut taxes. Well, where is it?
It's interesting looking at that graph. The tax burden falls in the 1980s, then rises, and it's relatively stable throughout all of the 2000s. And it's after 2000 that it starts to tick up. Have the Conservatives really lost the right to describe themselves as a low-tax party?
Oh, I think they have. And, you know, our polling has shown that, you know, most people now trust the Labour Party over the Conservatives in terms of taxation, and taxation particularly for their sort of bracket of income. And, you know, on this graph that we've just been looking at, the period between the 1980s and the 2000s, we had a very stable economic environment. It was very good for business. We did very well economically. And you can see that the impact of that is that we had low taxes, which is why we had a stable tax environment, which meant that we could have a good economic situation for businesses and a stable environment for businesses to...
And it seems that the tax burden sort of resting around 35% of GDP is that. It seems to be relatively stable. That's a nice equilibrium. At what point do you think that it's possible to get back down to that point, to really relieve that burden off the families and businesses of the United Kingdom?
Well, there's nothing stopping us from having it now. I think in the next budget, what we should really be looking at is where we can cut taxes, where we can sort of, you know, make improvements to really boost the economy and go for growth.
Well, let's hope so. Just finally, on this point, the Labour Party has been talking a little bit about cutting taxes. They've said that they want to scrap business rates, although they haven't explained what they'll replace them with. They've been talking about a VAT cut, albeit temporary. They've been talking about opposing the national insurance rises. Is the Labour Party now potentially sounding a little bit more small state than the Tory Party?
Well, yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, I think we haven't had a massive reversal, but it's certainly that both parties are sort of coming more towards the middle. I mean, it's not just about tax and spend. Also, the Labour Party have been very good on waste recently. You know, all the PPE scandals that we had during the pandemic, and council tax as well. You know, the Labour Party is certainly making the right noises. It's just about what kind of policies that they actually want to see, which they haven't really been very clear on at the moment.
I suppose the devil will be in the detail, but
Yes.
the noise is useful. Well, Danielle Boxall, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Really interesting conversation.